Our second scripture reading today comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 20, verses 19 through 31. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Again, Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." And with that, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone's sins, their sins are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven." Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, that means the twin, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands? Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Every year, on the Sunday after Easter, is this scripture. The scripture of the doubting Thomas, who would not believe unless he could see, unless he could touch with his own hands, unless he could experience it his very self. He would not believe. And yet, he has one of the most profound statements of faith in Scripture. My Lord and my God. It doesn't even say that he even went over there and touched Jesus' side or touched his hands. He just immediately proclaimed, "My Lord and my God." And this is a famous painting, but instead of Jesus being there, there's an image of Jesus, and it's called the Shroud of Turin, and you may have heard a lot about it. And some people believe it is the shroud that originally covered Jesus, and it is unexplainable. No one has ever been able to explain how the image got there. And so I'm going to present that to you today, and because there are people who, as Jesus said, have not seen and yet believe. There are also people who have been presented with a certain amount of evidence, and even though they have this preponderance of evidence, still don't believe. But it is an interesting artifact, whether it is a forgery or not, has never been proven, and I don't think it could be proved. But we'll see what it says, what people know about it, what scientists and artists have learned. So we'll go on. This is what the face of the image looks like when you look at it. This is what it looks like, just like this. And it's actually a 14-foot by 3-foot piece of cloth that has the entire front of the body. If it was draped, you can imagine Jesus lying down on part of it, and then the other part of it being draped over him. That's what this is. It has two images, his back and his front. But this is an image of his face. And let's see, I'll get the pointer out here. Does it work? Aha. These are blood stains. That's a blood stain, that's a blood stain. These are blood stains up here. This is a crease in the cloth, actually. Where it's darker, the body was closer to the cloth when the image was made. And where it's lighter, those are parts of his body that were further away from the cloth. This is a water stain from a fire in the 1500s. These down here are scourge marks on his chest. This is blood that's in his hair. This is his mouth, his nose. These are his eyes, his hair. But notice that how the blood goes in this direction. It looks like a backwards 3. But that's the face. This is a picture that was taken in 1978 by a gentleman named Barry Schwartz. The only scientific investigation of the Shroud of Turin that's ever happened was done in 1978. They did a bunch of tests on this piece of cloth. Let's see what the next one says. This is the full body, and if you can imagine it turned around, he was laying with his back here, it is supposed, and then the rest of the cloth was draped over him. And so, if that's the case, if you can imagine yourself standing, laying there, and the cloth being put on you, this would be your left arm, and that would be your right arm. So, you can see the marks in his hands and the blood along his arms. This is a water stain. These right here are scorch marks from the 1597, I think, fire. It was in the 1500s. These right here are patches that some nuns used to repair the cloth because of the fire. And down here is, you can see where some of the edges are not there for different reasons. These are, right here, are scorch marks. The whole thing was folded into a square where it was presented during communion, and they would raise it up so that you could just see his face during communion. And these are from poker holes from incense. And there's one that's in an L shape, this right here, and it's in different places on the cloth to different degrees, because of course it would make larger holes on the outside. But you can see them pretty well on here too, on the one closest to the fire, and then the further away you get, the smaller the holes get. You can imagine if fire was going through a cloth. But so there's his face and his body, and there's the back of his head, and this up here is blood around it wasn't actually a ringlet of thorns, it was a clump of thorns that was pushed down on his head, according to what this was, which is more like a crown in the Near Eastern, the ones that were more covered your entire head. And then you can see the scourge marks on all that covered his entire body except his feet and his arms. And this is blood on his feet down here. But anyway, we'll go to the next slide and see what it says. When you're close to it, you cannot see the image unless you're 15 feet away from it. If you're close to it, you can't see the image. Here's that blood that looks like a 3 or a backwards 3, depending on if you're looking at the front or back of the cloth, right there. And so this is it's linen. It's made out of linen, and in a herringbone kind of pattern. If you're familiar with patterns in linen cloths, so that's what it looks like. You can sort of see the scourge marks. That's on Jesus' body. You can see the fire marks a little bit that is made there. But and the blood, there's blood. But we'll go to the next one. Next. They marked these out, by the way, so they would know what they were testing in different parts of the cloth. That's what that is. We can go to the next one. Here we go. This is the face again. The earliest undisputed documentation of the Shroud of Turin in history that they were able to, document in history. It was in 1350 A.D. However, evidence from art history supports the shroud being available for artists to copy since the 6th century, in the sense that artists used this as inspiration for their artwork. And so we'll go to the next one. Before the 6th century, and the 6th century would be the 500s AD, before that time, when they would portray Jesus, he looked more like a Greek person than a Hebrew, and he didn't have a beard, and his hair was short, really short. And you can tell by the way he's dressed that it looks more like someone in a Greek play. But this is Jesus healing the bleeding woman, and it's carved on the walls of one of the churches. And this is 300 to 350 AD, and that's how they portrayed Jesus in artwork right there. And then here's a couple of others that are well, this is the statue right there. He looks more like David than Jesus. The statues of David that people make. But that's the Good Shepherd statue. That's from 300 to 350 AD. And this is also the Good Shepherd, a drawing on a church wall from 230 to 256 AD. So that's only the 3rd century after Jesus' death. And that's how they were drawing Jesus. Of course, the Bible doesn't describe anything about what Jesus looks like at all in the Bible. And then you get to the 6th century, the 500s, and you start seeing pictures. This is the Pantocrator. That means creator of everything, or creator of all things. And so these images are called the Pantocrator. And there are certain, about 11 different artistic signs on this that shows that they were using the Shroud of Turin when they painted this. They were copying it. So he has a beard now, and his eyes are sort of like the owl-like kind of eyes that it sort of appears on the shroud. The man on the shroud, his eyes are closed. And they often do this wisp of hair, which I think they get from the blood that was that 3 or something. They sometimes do that. And sometimes the beard is a little bit forked, or the way that his mouth looks is a lot like the shroud. There's different things that people look for. But our historians say that the artists were looking at the Shroud of Turin when they were doing these drawings, and that was in the 6th century, about 500 AD. The most famous Pantocrator is on the next one, creator of all things. The next slide. This is a famous artwork, and it's got the wisp of hair, and it's got the owl-like eyes, and it's got the beard, and I think that this at his neck is sort of taken a little bit from the shroud too. There's several of them that artists point to, but we'll go to the next one. And then there's the Hungarian Pray manuscript that is reliably dated to between 1192 and 1195 AD. And this is the only artwork other than the shroud, which is not an artwork, whatever it is not an artwork, that doesn't have the cloth there on Jesus. He doesn't have, he's naked, and his arms are crossed like this. And then down here you have this pattern. No other artwork ever would ever portray without that modesty cloth on in any artwork, but this one does, and the shroud does. But this is the herringbone pattern, and you can see here the poker holes that are right here. There's 4 of them. And this is what a herringbone pattern looks like under a microscope. In fact, this is the actual shroud, a piece of the shroud under the microscope. That's what it looks like. But so people say that this is an artwork based on the Shroud of Turin because of the way it portrays it. You can't see his thumbs, when you have a nail put into your wrist like that, your thumb goes inside, collapses inside, and it won't straighten out. So that's why there's only four. You can only see his four fingers because his thumb is underneath. And that's the same with the shroud. And it's because of that is what would happen to your hand if you had a nail, put in your hand like it was put into Jesus' hand or someone who was crucified. So let's go to the next one. And there's the poker holes. You can see there. This is the back. And we'll look at the scourges on this back a little bit closer to. But they were likely made with incense embers. So that's like the poker holes on the Hungarian frame image. Let's go to the next one. Secondo Pia was the first photographer of the Shroud of Turin. On May 28, 1898, he took a picture of it. And he was in one of those very first cameras, like you put your head underneath the carpet, goes over the back of your head. And so he took the very first picture one time when it was being displayed. And when he did, this next picture is what he was looking at. You want to go to the next one? Remember, this is what it actually looks like. This is what he was looking at. But when he went to develop the film, he about dropped the plate, that thick plate, because he couldn't believe what he was looking at. Suddenly, he said, his words were, "The face of my Lord was looking back at me." And so he took a picture of this, but when he developed it, this next picture is what he saw. So can you imagine taking a picture of a cloth, and then this comes back at you, and you can see there's the crease marks and notice that on the other one, go back to the other one for a second. The one right before it. Notice, see, that's backwards, and then when he takes a picture of it, you see that it looks like a 3 now. Everything has reversed, like it would in a photograph, which means that the image on the Shroud of Turin is a negative, a perfect negative. And when he took a picture of it, this is what he saw. So, and let's see, let's go to the next one. And so here you can compare, this is what the shroud looks like, this is what it looks like when you take a picture. And I have a couple of them. I want to get them back afterwards, but you can pass them around and look at them. This is, photography has gotten, of course, much better since the Pia in 1898. But on here you can see, whoops, did I do something? I turned it off.
I think it's coming.
We'll go over here. I turned it off with my hand. These are the scorch marks and the patches. There's his face. And this is the blood down on the cloth, down at his feet. These fluoresce like they do because they are burn marks. It's one of the reasons that this isn't a scorch, that the image wasn't made by a scorch. The fibers would have been damaged like they are damaged here if this had been any kind of a scorch kind of artwork. And the fibers aren't damaged. So it'll go to the next one. This is what both the front and the back look like in the photographs. And the image is made by the coloration of the very surface fibers. And you can have, and I'm not talking about a thread, I'm talking about a fiber. And you can have a fiber right next to a fiber, and one of them will be colored to make the image, and the other right next to it won't be. And so it's quite interesting the way that it was formed. There you can see his foot really well down there, and the heel. But let's see, it's switched now
This right here is the blood from when he was, they put the spear in the side. And it would be his right side. So you can see how that has changed. It was over here on the original. And when you take a photograph, it ends up over there. So this is his right arm and this is his left arm. But let's see. Let's go to the next one. Let's see. These are the scourge marks. And in archaeology, they didn't know what a fulcrum flagrum, not a fulcrum, a flagrum looked like until they discovered it later in archaeology. But the instrument that made these, and you can sort of see how they line up with these. And the way the markings are, you can tell that either one person was scourging him and changing positions, or you had two people doing it by the angle. This right here is another watermark. This right here, this is his back, and this is the blood that was from his side that pooled down around his waist. And this has something like 100 marks on his back and his entire body, except his arms that were above him and his feet. The only places that didn't have these marks on them. But they're the scorch marks. And they're a little bit lighter up here, and the reason is because when you carried that cross beam, or were carrying the cross, it rubbed against his back, and so the scorch marks up here aren't seen as well, but you can see places where the cross damaged his back. Not to mention, breathing up and down on the back of a cross would mess up your back. It's already messed up. But anyway, let's go to the next one, I guess. This is his hands. There's the watermark again, and the patches and the burns. But they found, when forensic scientists looked at it, that the pattern of the blood is such as if their hands had been raised and the blood had been streaming down. And you can see the four fingers with you can't see his thumbs because they're retracted underneath him, because that would be what would happen in a crucifixion. So let's go around to the next one. This is the blood from the crown of thorns. That's the crease mark in the cloth. That's his hair. And these you can really see the scourge, the scratches and things on his shoulders because of bearing that cross there. And we can go to the next one, I guess. This is a later photograph in 1931, a little bit better than the one in 1898. And then there's that blood that trickled down from his forehead. There and all around his head. Okay, we'll go to the next one, I guess. Now, in 1976, they took that photograph we were just looking at, the one from 1931, and they had what was called a VP8 analyzer, and they used that in NASA to chart the mountains, the hills, and different things, topograph or something, on other planets and things like that, or the moon. And it would tell you distance ranges, But anyway, this is what happened when they put the picture underneath that VP8 analyzer. Now, you put a normal everyday picture under it and it would be distorted. But this isn't distorted. And so it is the fact that they just were playing around and they did this, that's what led them to do the scientific investigation in 1978 was having put that INRI's picture underneath this VP8 analyzer and getting that. So, go to the next one. The image was found to contain density data based on the number of fibrils that were discolored in an area related to the cloth body distance. So the areas that were closer to the cloth, where the cloth was closer to the body, would be higher, would be raised higher, and in the areas that were lighter, that were further away from the body, would be, look to be further away. So had this sort of 3D image. It's not really 3D, but sort of like that. And there's no other artifact ever that displays these kind of characteristics that you could do this with, that you could take a photograph of, and it would have those kind of effects. So it's related to the cloth body distance. And technology to detect the density information has improved since 1976. And this is a guy named Aldo. I do not speak Italian, so I can't pronounce his last name. But he took a photo of the shroud in 1998 with an edge enhancement kind of technology similar to the V8 analyzer. And that's what happened when he did that. This is what he came up with. What happened? The density discovery led to the formation of the Shroud of Turin research project in 1978, and here they are examining. They did a bunch of tests on this. You can see the scorch, the poker holes there. You can see that this is a patch and that's a patch. You can see some of the burn marks, but you can't see the image when you're that close. You have to be 15 feet away to see the image. So you couldn't have painted it with a very long paintbrush. Let's see, let's go to the next one. The primary objective of the STIRP team was to determine what caused the image on the shroud. They were not able to determine that. They don't know to this day what caused the image on the shroud. They could only determine what it was not, and they determined that whatever it is not an artwork. They proved that it wasn't an artwork by some different tests. Let's go to the next one. This is one of the tests that they did. Backlighting shows that blood soaked through the cloth. See, there's that 3 or backwards 3, whichever one. And you can see the blood. You can see the blood on the arms here. Can't see the one on the head very well because that's where the light is. But you can see it on the arms. So you can see the blood that soaked through the cloth. But nothing that would allegedly could have formed the image like paint or anything else. If it were there, you would be able to see it if you backlit the cloth, just like you can see the blood, but you cannot see the image. So that's not how the image was formed. And we know it wasn't formed by a scorch because it didn't damage the fiber walls, or the cell walls of the fibers. So we go to the next one. In 1988, 3 laboratories carbon dated a sample from the lower edge of the shroud. That was the one that was down on the side, on the left side, where they cut out a swatch of it, and they cut it into 3 parts, and they sent 4 parts actually. I think they sent it to 3 laboratories, and they kept a reserve sample. And the 3 laboratories, all of them came up with a date between 1260 and 1390 regarding the date that would put it in the having been formed in the medieval age. But then the evidence from art history shows it before that. But let's go to the next one. These are the two of the scientists who did the carbon date. For the next few decades, those who recognized the 90% of scientific evidence that supported the authenticity of the shroud were deemed members of the Flat Earth Society. David said that about them in the newspapers. But in 2005, using the reserve piece of the cloth, the one that they had saved, cut for carbon dating, chemist Ray Rogers determined that the area of the cloth sample for the dating was taken from is chemically different from the rest of the cloth. In fact, the whole cloth was linen, but down in that corner, and the different corners that they had fixed and repaired, there was cotton, and they used cotton because they could dye it when they did the repairs to match the rest of the cloth. And they were in Jewish kind of things they wouldn't have mixed. They wouldn't have mixed the cotton with the linen. But they did this, the nuns did this in the medieval times to repair. And so he determined that it was chemically different than the rest of the cloth. And other textile experts also determined that the section of the cloth in question had been repaired in the Middle Ages with an invisible weaving technique, like that you would use if you were doing a tapestry and you wanted to hang it and you wanted to be seen from both sides. You wouldn't want to do a repair that could be seen, so you wanted it to be invisible. That's what they called it. So no one has ever been able to produce the image, even today, with all the properties that the Shroud of Turin has. In 2012, at the Shroud Conference in Valencia, Spain, the following challenge was given to anybody who would want to replicate it. This challenge was given, and different people have tried, but haven't succeeded. The shroud and its image must be regarded as a unique enigma that has to date defied a scientific explanation despite the C14 test carried out in 1988. Anyone asserting that the Shroud of Turin is a medieval artifact and who also wishes to claim scientific credentials must first show how it can bear an image with the following characteristics. It has to have all of these. The body image is created by a molecular change of the linen fibers. And like I said, one linen fiber can have that discoloration, that change in it, and the one right next to it might not have that color on it. The body image does not penetrate below the surface fibrils. In fact, I think that it is only really contained on when you wash the linen, it has this coating on it, and that the image is only on that coating, which is just a hair's breadth of a millimeter or less. There are also blood stains. There are also blood stains on the cloth, and there is no body image beneath the blood stains. So wherever the blood stains were, and the blood was on the cloth first, the image didn't form there. The body image is not visible when illuminated by transmitted light, like this picture here, but the blood stains are. So nothing that soaked the fibers made the image. The fibrils are discolored with a density related to the distance the cloth would be from the body if the cloth covered a body. Areas closer to the body have more fibrils discolored, and areas further from the body have fewer. The sides of the body are not represented even where the blood was transferred to the cloth and between the head images. So there's blood between the head images and there's blood on the sides, what would be the sides, but outside of the image areas. And the resolution of the image is sufficient to resolve body features of a few millimeters. There are no outlines or directionality to the body image within the plane of the cloth. The body image has the visual characteristics of a photographic negative, that is, normal light and dark areas are reversed. And Barry Schwartz was the official photographer for the Sturt team in 1978, and in the 1990s he put up the first website that's totally dedicated to science related to the shroud online in response to tabloids that he read in the grocery stores that said Leonardo da Vinci painted the Shroud of Turin, and Leonardo da Vinci was born even after the Shroud of Turin was first even seen in history. So he says Leonardo is a good artist, but he's not that good. And this happens to be the sudarium of Vito, which is another cloth that supposedly covered Jesus' face, the one that would be separate when you read about it in the Gospels, folded up separately. And they found that it perfectly matches when it's folded like it would be put over him on the cross. Folded, the blood stains perfectly match the blood stains on the face of the shroud. So that's just another thing. And this is another artist did this artwork from the Shroud of Turin. So many artists have looked at the Shroud of Turin as inspiration. And this is the actual original artwork of Thomas inspecting Jesus' body. And that one I showed you first, just taking it out with the shroud there. Where his finger went to it. That's Thomas. Wants to touch and see. But I wanted just to share that with you. And our hope is built on Jesus' blood. Whether that's his blood on the shroud or not doesn't really matter so much as that we know it was shed for us.